In this video, we're going to talk about creating users within the SAP HANA Studio. So to do this, we need to launch our SAP HANA Studio. So we'll go to Start, All Programs, SAP HANA, and we'll launch the SAP HANA Studio. Now, the user we're going to create is a user which will essentially only have read-only access to a specific set of tables. This user then can be distributed to multiple people, and you will know that those users won't be able to delete or change the data in your HANA server. So automatically, when we build a new connection in SAP HANA, you have to create a user. So this user, for example, is logged in with the system user. So the system user is the administrator. The user has access to all your tables. So if I go into my database, if I select the SQL editor, I can do a few things. So the first thing that I can do is I can create a schema. So obviously we're going to restrict access to creating schemas. Secondly, I could import data. So I'm going to go and import some data now by going to File Local, and from the SAP HANA Content folder I'm going to choose Data from Local File. I'll choose the database where I'm loading it to. I'll choose the file which I've actually put on my desktop. It contains a row header, and I'm going to load it in that schema that I created called STS, and it's going to be called the DIM customer table. So I'll click Next. We'll give it a primary key, so the customer ID will be the primary key, and then we'll click Finish. So now if I refresh my catalog and expand the STS schema, we should have a table there called DIM customer. Now with this user, I was able to create the schema and create the table and load data. So to create additional users, I'm just going to close these windows that we've got open. We go to our authorization folder within the catalog folder. So if I expand the authorization folder, we can create either users or roles. So to create a user, I'm going to expand the users set subfolder. And at the moment you can see we've got 4 users by default. To create a new user, I select users, right click, and select new user. I'm going to call this user STS read because this user will only have read-only access to the STS schema. However, of course, you can call this user anything you want. We'll then give it a password. So I'm going to call my password capital S lowercase ts 12345. So capital S lowercase ts 12345. And we can actually choose between 3 types of authentication. One is password authentication, which I've selected here. We can choose Kerberos authentication in case we've got that implemented. And we can even use SAML configuration as well. So now that we've entered the username and password of that user, we need to decide on the rights. So normally the granted role will be public. So if I select the granted role tab, click on the green plus and just type the first 3 letters, we should see that role automatically be selected. So now we've got access to the public role. We can also then decide if this role is grantable to other users, and we're going to leave that deselected. I can then go to my SQL privileges and then decide which objects I want to access. So if I click on the green plus again, I'm going to select STS because we only want people to access this schema. So it finds the schema STS. So now that I've selected the schema, I can then choose what rights I want to give that user. In our small example, we're going to select the select privilege, and we're going to make it not grantable to other users. So now this user STS read can run a select statement only on the STS schema. We don't need to assign any analytic privileges, system privileges, or package privileges. So the only thing we've assigned is the granted role public and the SQL privilege, which is select on the STS schema. The last thing we need to do is click on execute or deploy. So this will then create that user. We'll know that that user has been created because we can right click on our list of users and select refresh. But how do we test it? Well, the simple way to test it is as follows. So I'm just going to close all the windows which are open on the screen, and I'm going to create a new connection to my database. So to do this, I'm going to right click, add a system, type in the host name, the instance number, and for the description I'm going to call this STS read. This will mean that I will enter the password and the login and password that I've created for this specific user. So this description can be anything, but just to distinguish it from the main one, I'm going to call it STS read. We then click on next. Then we add that database user. So I'm going to enter STS read with the password capital S lowercase ts 12345. Then I'll click on next. So it shows you my additional properties. It shows you the host and the port I'm connecting to. And then lastly, I can click on finish. Now, because we created that user, STS read, with that password, the first time you log in as that user, you must enter a new password. So I'm just going to enter capital STS lowercase read 123. So this is the new password that I'm using for that user. So then we've got access to that system. But now if I expand, you see we only see a very, very restricted set of tables. If I now expand the STS schema and expand the tables, we should see that dim customer table. However, now if I was to right click on that table and say delete, and I'm going to say delete cascade, so let's delete the whole table. Of course, we should get the message that we cannot drop this table because we have insufficient privileges. We're not authorized. Also, if I go and launch the SQL editor and try and create a schema and execute, well, we can't create it because it's the same name. Let's create another one, which is STS2. We should see that we have again insufficient privileges because we're not authorized to create schemas. So we can only actually run select statements on this table. To prove that, if I close this window, right click on dim customer and say open content, we should be able to see the data within that table. So we're running a select statement on that table. But again, if I copy this syntax, I'm now going to try and delete the data from the table with a delete from statement. So this should try and attempt to delete all the rows from that table. But again, I get insufficient privileged and not authorized. So that's a very small demo on how to create a user which only has specific rights, in this case read-only rights, to a database and also a table.